Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Another 2 minutes, guys and ladies, and we're gonna start. Thank you for making the time. Good. See, people are joining. Thank you very much. Good. So let's start. Thank you, everybody. Let me share my screen first of all. So thank you again for making the time today. Before we dive into the presentation or the topic for today, I thought I'd give you a bit of overview about who am I and who we are. So my name is Radu Farțonia. From a background standpoint, I'm a finance operations guy. I've spent the largest part of my career in working in large-scale finance processes, different clients, different industries, different processes. One thing that I observed that was valid across the board is that the companies that I've worked for, the processes that I've worked for, have important challenges in securing the payments. So they spent a lot of time, and even the teams I was responsible for spent a lot of time in controlling their payments. We're still losing money, and we had a hard time in identifying what we needed to do about it in order to secure, to produce a more quality intense process. And this is the gap that we wanted to close at Paid Analytics, which is to make operational controls more efficient and more smart through latest technologies. Now, before we start, I want to make 3 disclaimers, actually 2 disclaimers and 1 ask. First of all, the idea of this workshop is for me to present to you the fraud topic with sufficient information in order to be relevant, but at the same time not to be too detailed so you get bored after 10 minutes. So we try to cram about 2 years worth of research and experimenting into 1 hour, or 30 minutes to be more precise. So for the experts among you that want to go into more detail, we can take this discussion offline and go in all the details you want. This is the first disclaimer. Second disclaimer, what I'm going to present to you will apply differently for different companies. Now you might say, this cannot happen to me. I'm not going to argue with you. However, in our experience, we have not seen, neither in our personal experience, nor our research, nor the clients that we work with, any companies where some of the scenarios that we'll present cannot happen. This is the second disclaimer. Last is ask. Questions might arise during the presentation. We've done this presentation quite a few times, and we found that the best way that it works along the presentation, wherever you have a question, please use the Q&A function or the chat function, put them there, and we will consolidate, and at the end, I will answer all of them, all of the questions. If you don't have time, I will answer also offline, but there will be quite a lot of information, so at each section, use the Q&A function or the chat function. Now this is it, let's start. First of all, in terms of the agenda, first of all, we're going to give you a very brief overview of who Paid Analytics is, what we do, and a bit of our story. We are going to go afterwards in sort of high-level presentation of understanding fraud from a high level, and then we're going to go into even more detail about we come to payments. We're going to present then how to fight fraud and real case studies that you can evaluate and see how exposed you are to such fraud. And then we're going to introduce also the solution that we at Paid Analytics propose. And obviously then we'll do the Q&A session. So please, again, at any point in time when you have questions, use the Q&A function or the chat. All right. Nice overview. Well, with regards to our vision, we wanted to create the first digital platform aimed solely at helping companies secure their payments processes. Through our operational experience and our research, we consider that there's still a big gap, and a big need in the area of operational controls, in making operational controls more efficient, that is enhancing the quality of the process, in our case, the payments process. And in terms of our background, we started as a startup program in Societe Generale. So we were employees of SGGSC. I'm not sure if anybody on the attendees is from SGGSC, but we were in SGGSC. There was a group-wide startup program. We developed our platform, we deployed it in the Societe Generale group, and in 2019 we spinned off and created our own company, Paid Analytics. With regards to the business problem, as I said, for the largest part of my career, or our experience, I've managed finance operations in various multinational companies, and I've witnessed firsthand, even the teams that I've managed, how hard it is for the medium and large size companies and processes to manage their payment processes. And we used to, even teams I've managed, and we've also worked with other companies, they lose money due to various errors, worst case scenarios, fraud. We spend high effort in identifying and managing these errors. A small caveat, the regular accounts payable process or payments process, they spend about up to 20% of their time just doing controls under one form or another. This is quite an effort. And also, closing the brackets, we have real challenges, and customers we work with have real challenges in understanding the root causes of these errors. Now I want to go into a bit more detail. And the business problem with regards to these errors, what are these errors and how important are they? Well, we split it in two dimensions because this is also how our solution works. This is on the left side, we have, let's say, operational errors, like duplicate payments, overpayments, currency errors, VAT errors, amount errors, and on the right side, fraud. Now, the cumulative effect of these payments may cause up to 1% of the payments that are lost. Now, so if you pay 100 million, up to 1 million is at risk. There is quite extensive research out there from consulting companies, financial institutions. So if anybody's interested in this backup research, by the way, we can share it afterwards, but this is relatively well established. Now, obviously, now we're going to focus more on the right side, on the fraud, rather than the operational errors. And we need to understand better first. We need to define. In order to understand it, you need to be able to define it. So I think one of the best sources, if you try to start to research fraud, is ACTIV, which is the Association of Certified Fraud Auditors. They put out a comprehensive report out every year. It's about 80 to 100 pages. So for the ones that enjoy this type of reading, well, we can share it, but it's also available online. And this report is built out of cumulative fraud incidents that have been reported out of fraud auditors in this community across geographies, and they contribute with actual cases that happens. Now, the cumulative effect of these incidents that were reported in 2020 were about 4 million. The median loss was about 125,000. For me, the scariest one was the typical case lasts 14 months before it's detected. With regards to exposure, it's both small and large size companies that are exposed to fraud overall. Small companies are exposed due to their lacking resources, understanding, and so on. Large companies are exposed due to their complexity and the hope of fraudsters that the one transaction gets lost in the madness of that often large companies have to deal with. I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. Any questions you have, please use the Q&A function. I'll answer all of the questions at the end. Now, this is a big picture, but okay, we need to define fraud. Now, if you look at what fraud experts, how they structure fraud, it's more or less in 3 areas or in 3 categories. One area is corruption. Corruption is the most frequent, is the most common one, meaning it's available in all geographies, and it refers to bribery, extortion, and so on and so forth. The second one is asset misappropriation, which is the most frequent. So 86% of fraud cases refer to asset misappropriation. And asset misappropriation refers to any misuse of the organizational resources under one shape or another. The third one is financial statement. A financial statement is any omission or wrong or misstatement of the financial statements of the company, and this is the most costly. So we go from the most common, corruption, to the most frequent, asset misappropriation, to the most costly, which is financial statement. As you can see in the chart in the middle, it's not so clear cut, meaning most schemes involve more than one dimension. I want to give you a concrete example. If there is a billing scheme that happens, the billing scheme where there is a collusion between an internal employee and the supplier, this type of case is both corruption and asset misappropriation. So that's why you see this overlap. And I want to draw your attention to the right side, to the heat map, because this is, we think, the area that we cover, and one of the most important, because it refers to the categories with regards to misappropriation. So obviously this heat map shows the risk as well as the value exposure of various scenarios. Now, as you can see in the heat map, billing schemes are the most common and the most impactful type of scheme within asset misappropriation. And this is the area where paid analytics come into play, the area that we cover. Billing schemes have another element to it. Usually billing schemes, and I will show you when we go to the study cases, end up in the news. So besides the money that a company loses, it's really exposed to a very, very high reputational risk. We also think that the other fraud schemes, like the ones that you see here, cash larceny, payroll, are better addressed are already relatively well addressed, or are best addressed by internal policies. But I want to give you some examples of the others to understand. If you look at the fraud angle from the way that a fraud auditor looks like, it's a very broad definition. And I've seen in the people that attended or that at least subscribed, I don't know if they joined, we've seen also some HR people, but I want to give an example because I want that everybody takes something away from it. So for example, in the payroll category, there are examples of cases, it includes the cases where payments are sent to inactive employees or where overtime is recorded but not executed. So a fraud auditor will look at the overtime, and a fraud auditor will look also at big provision of untaken leaves because it's a potential area of misappropriation. So I want to give it that if you look at the angle that a fraud auditor looks like, it's a very broad definition. We at Paid Analytics focus on billing schemes because you think that they are not covered today as well as they should have, and besides the money, they carry a big reputational risk. All right. Some of the conclusions after all of the research that we did in the last couple of years, and also the solution that we've built, is that to a certain extent, the definition of fraud between what fraud experts, fraud experts look at fraud and what companies think is a bit different. Also, given the huge variety of types of fraud and limitations of companies, it's impossible to be 100% protected against fraud. It's simply impossible. You just need to do the best or the best setup possible where you try to gauge the outcomes versus the resources that are put in. Also, fraud controls. Real-time fraud controls are hard to define, hard to design. And we've not seen many cases where real-time fraud controls were applied. And most companies try to control this risk, fraud risk, by communication and or by specific internal policies. And so, what do we propose now, having talked about it in terms of trying to define fraud? What do we propose? We propose that fraud should fight against fraud within 3 areas. We usually see that we need to create a fraud awareness culture. By this, I want to be more specific in that each company, if you look at the way fraud auditors look at it, each company needs to decide where to draw the line in the sand and how to position a specific case or fraud or not, or non-compliance. The example that I gave it, overtime that is recorded but not executed. A fraud auditor will look at it at fraud. If a company does, it's debatable. But anyway, every company should decide on the different aspects, how to position them or how to categorize them. The second one, it would be recommendable that once in a while there should be, every company should undergo a fraud audit that will look at all areas of the business. Again, fraud is a really, really wide topic. And last but not least, because we're talking about payments today, we're going to present, or I'm going to present to you 3 scenarios. And with regards to payments specifically, and the scenarios I'm going to present, you can evaluate how good or bad you are covered against those scenarios that I'm going to put forward. Now, I put it at intentional as down the rabbit hole, because you really need to go down the rabbit hole. So when you try to start to understand fraud. So as I said, with regards to asset misappropriation that are by far the most frequent fraud category, billing schemes are the most important, most impactful, and carry high reputational risk. And if you look at billing schemes, they are more or less at the actual cases that happen. I want to do a small caveat here. There is no official numbers out there, but it's an estimation that over half of the incidents get never reported. So it's really, we're not looking at a complete picture here, but if you look at what is reported and if you do the research out there, more or less billing schemes and payment fraud really falls into 3 scenarios. The one scenario is stolen identity, which is the case where a third party takes over the identity of an existing supplier and asks for a change in bank details or for an urgent payment. This is case number 1. I'm going to show you a case study. The second one is unusual transactions. It's cases where supplier know and try to exploit existing weaknesses of the current processes by sending fake invoices, under invoices are specific tolerance, and so on and so forth. And last category is internal fraud or kickback schemes. So this time it's systems and process weaknesses that are exploited by employees through fictitious payment agreements with suppliers, and so on and so forth. So I prepared a case study for each of the ones. And I've tried to limit the case studies at something that is very easy researchable online. So these cases that I'm going to present here, and you're going to get a presentation afterwards, you can find them very easily online. It's not very hard. So this means also that they got a lot of publicity. So this is the first case for the stolen identity scenario. Is Advanced Publication, is a very large company in the US. They received an email or requesting an urgent payment and indicating that the future payment should be redirected to a new bank account. The request was made for a supplier with a very similar name to the real vendor. And whoever did that change assumed that it was a request from the actual vendor to change the bank details. The real vendor was really important for advanced publications, and the payment was done. So 7.9 million were paid to the wrong supplier. This is also what it's called the $7.9 million email or something like that if you research it on Google. And it was only discovered because the actual payment vendor complained about non-payment. Now, if you look at this case and if you research it in more detail, but there are three conclusions if you want to come up. First of all, it's a combination of factors. First of all, the victim company had complicated payments processes with multiple payment channels. What does that concretely mean for the non-finance people out there? It means that that there is a way to pay make an invoice payment through the actual wire transfer. There is a process for urgent payments. There is a manual payment process. There is direct debit and so on. Multiple payment channels. If you are in processes that have multiple payment channels, the probability or the exposure to risk is higher. Second one is improper controls before the payment run. Since this payment run was done the first time to this account, I think it should have come up as a, let's say an unusual transaction. And obviously the last, because I put them in the order of importance, the watch outs, it's an unclean database of vendors. So this is case number 1, where a third party has stolen the identity of an existing supplier. Going forward, case number 2. Now, in all of the research we've done, this one was by far the most elaborate fraud. You can also research it online. In this case, there was an individual, a gentleman called Evaldas Rimasauskas. I think I butchered his name, but he's a Lithuanian individual. He stole about 123 million from Google and Facebook over 2 years. Very, very long time. So what we did, he forged invoices that were sent on top of regular invoices from the actual supplier, forged emails from actual employees of the true supplier, and forged contracts to fool the bank. Even more than that, after funds were received, they were instantly redirected to offshore accounts. And it took over 2 years to uncover, and they haven't gotten the whole money back, or the full amount. Now, again, this was the most elaborate scheme that we've come across. There are, again, some conclusions. Improper payment controls, and I want to state a sentence here because this is also the condition that we started out to build paid analytics solution. Most controls with regards to payments look if a transaction is correct, not if a transaction is normal. Please keep that in mind. I'm going to explain it. So I'm going to say it again. Most controls look if a transaction is correct, not if a transaction is normal. The second reason is also, again, unclean vendor databases. So again, it comes up as let's say a pattern. There is also the way that vendor databases are handled are a very good indicator of what is the exposure to fraud, basically. Case number 2, so unusual transaction. Case number 3, this is a case of an employee of a company called Tor Drive, who changed right before payment or changed the bank details of a supplier to his own bank. So it was the actual employee that worked and that was processing the payments. And for 3 years directed funds to own account. It's not clear if it was just one supplier. I don't think so, because otherwise he would have complained, but changed the details of outgoing payments into own details. This was only discovered after a fraud audit, unfortunately. And there's some conclusions again here, and this is it's very, very clear when researching it. If there is no automatic triggering of a workflow, so in case of changes to sensitive data, that means every time something sensitive is changed in your vendor details or in partner details, there should be an automatic workflow trigger that somebody looks at it, somebody investigates it and validates. If this doesn't happen, and if you rely on somebody to actually bring this change forward for a validation, risk is not so good covered, not so properly. If there is no control on for changes performed to sensitive fields. Again, second reason in terms of, again, and last, no segregation of duties. So I've put them in the order of the importance of what it should be, done. Now, what I challenge you is, again, as I said at the beginning, to try to take these three scenarios and try to evaluate how exposed or not you are in the companies that you work for. I've also presented the fraud from a broader definition at the beginning, so people that do not work in finance and that look at what I'm saying here start to think about fraud in a more holistic way, and then again decide on where to draw the line in the sand for that. Now, from all of this, in order to protect against payment fraud, for us there are two conclusions. First of all, because many payments processes are complex and most of them have a manual element to it, there is a need to control the payments before they happen strictly from a fraud angle. And I want to come back to what I said before. So current controls, the way that companies control payments right now, in most companies, again, I said at the beginning, it might apply different to different companies, but the controls that exist in most companies today look to evaluate if the transaction, if it's correct, not if it's normal. What is correct? And usually when a payment is controlled, you look at if it respected the process, if it has the data correctly captured, if it was approved. Now, all of this in most fraud cases have happened, but rarely somebody looks at how normal the transaction is considering the service type, the supplier history, the historical payments, and so on and so forth. And this is exactly what we try to do. We developed Paid Analytics, our solution that analyzes transactions before they happen strictly from a fraud angle. Conclusion, this is one outcome. This is a need that we identify. The second one is the need to validate supplier identity. As you've seen in some cases, there was some change of or intervention in the bank details. So there is a need to verify that the account that you're paying into the bank, it really belongs to that supplier. Now, the current process to verify supplier identity, where there is a change in bank details or a new setup, either does not exist or it's manual. Manual means that in order to change the details, some companies, not all of them, call the supplier and say, dear Mr. X, is this account really your account? That takes a lot of time, and this is still subject to abuse. This is not the way to do it. So I want to throw to another conclusion. The only true source of a supplier identity is the bank, where every incorporated company needs to set up its bank details. So PSD2 is an open regulation. I'm going to give a bit more details, but has created the opportunity to validate the identity of the suppliers in a digitalized and secure manner. I'm going to explain how that happens. Now, again, we've talked a lot about problems. What is the solution that we at Paid Analytics propose? So basically, our solution works in exactly these two dimensions. It works on a real-time fraud prevention. So there is a detailed analysis for each payment transaction strictly from a fraud angle, and on the other side, a digital solution to validate the identity of the supplier, which we named intentionally Know Your Supplier, in order to resonate with some of the Know Your Customers processes that probably are, you know them. Now, look at our solution. If we have time, I'm going to do a bit demo that you see it live. But with regards to our real-time fraud prevention, what do we do here? So from a process flow standpoint, we upload the data from the customer, and our AI engine generates the prediction on the cases that are suspicious, that are then validated, which this validation feeds back into the learner. And to be more concretely, because at least, again, in the when I've seen who the people that let's say enroll to this presentation, we also have some data scientists there. So first, what we do is we look at each individual data point of the transaction. That is, each individual data point is subject to a dedicated forensic algorithm. So we look at invoice numbers or document numbers that are subject to a dedicated algorithm. We look at amounts that are scrutinized from specific tolerances, past behavior, structure of the amount, and we also look at document dates. But besides each individual data point, we look at the overall transaction to see how normal it is against previous behavior, how normal it is, how similar it is to other suppliers, how normal it is compared to other similar suppliers, how normal it is to publicly available data about that company. And I want to give you a concrete example. So if a payment transaction is new in terms of occurrence, resembles similar well-established suppliers, the company is newly established, and this transaction brings significant revenue fluctuation, and this is available from public data. The transaction overall scores higher in terms of abnormality. So this is the transaction that you normally should look at. So all of the scenarios, as well as the transactions, have different weightage, and their cumulative effect determines the risk scoring. Now, this is part of the secret sauce that we use. The second part of the secret sauce is our mechanism to refine the outcomes, because having been finance guys, we know that there is a always limited resources out there. So we want to limit, we have mechanism to refine the findings, to limit the time spent of these investigations to, let's say, a couple of minutes for every payment run, and to make this feasible to be done in a real time. By this, we managed to identify fake invoices, unusual transactions, and also where suppliers try to circumvent, or partners start to circumvent existing policy or have different kickback schemes. Now, with regards to supplier identity, because it's a second dimension, this is a case where there is a change, or you want to validate that, because it's important, the aspect you need to validate that an account really belongs to a company. So first, let's assume that there is a verification that you want to do because there was a change in bank details, or there was a request for a new partner, new supplier being set up. As I said before, the way that most companies verify bank details had several disadvantages, from being cumbersome to not covering the risk that companies think it covers. So our solution ties into the PSD2 regulation. PSD2 regulation, again, if you want to go into more detail, we can take it afterwards, but PSD2 regulation has provided the opportunity to verify the identity of suppliers directly with the bank. So basically, PSD2 breaks the monopoly on the user's data that banks have until now, and allows third parties to access this data with the consent. So we need the consent of the suppliers to do it. I'm going to show you how. So this is exactly what we do. We require minimal data, like the VAT, the name of the supplier, the VAT registration number, the IBAN that is to be checked, and the email. This data is checked for consistency, and then we ask the consent from the supplier. We correct, after which we connect directly to the bank and ask for the data that we require, basically the same information, the bank account and the name, directly from the source bank, and we do a comparison between the input of the customer, the publicly available data, and information from the bank, and then we validate or not this change. We think that this is the best and most efficient way to validate the identity of a supplier and to protect against fraud. So last but not least, before we go into the live demonstration and the Q&A, to sum up, our solution is aimed to protect the company against all issues that appear along the transaction journey, from regular fraud to operational errors to fraud. I've given the overall definition of fraud and how fraud experts look at this, in order to understand that fraud is a really big topic, and it applies to different areas of the business in different ways. With regards to payments, the scenarios, the categories that I explained and the scenarios cover most of the, let's say, the real cases that each company should be protected against. And we wanted to do this, to the protection against fraud in a real time, because we believe that this is should be part of, is part of our mission and should be part of the mission of finance teams in general. And with regards to fraud overall, as I mentioned, work on culture is our recommendation. But again, you need to define for each company how you look at fraud, given how broad the topic is. Perform an audit now and then, and again, against what I presented, evaluate how your payments processes are covered by the scenarios that I shared. So if you found this presentation interesting, you want to continue this conversation, to look in our solution in more detail, or if you want our help in establishing your own controls with your own solution, or if you just want a diagnostic to your risk exposure, again, please contact us. You'll get my contacts after this meeting, and we can continue the conversation after, in the next weeks, next months, and so on and so forth. So I'm gonna stop the presentation for the moment before we go into the live demonstration and just see if there are any questions. If not, I invite you now to raise the questions on anything that I've presented, and or if not, I'm going to continue the conversation. And again, afterwards, you can contact me for any follow-up discussions. So last call up for any potential questions that you might have. All right. If there are not questions, let me show you a bit how it looks like.
We have a question.
Yes. I'm gonna explain exactly that, Laura. Exactly those two questions. I'm gonna demonstrate it, how it happens in real time, and how to get the consent. The consent is really an important aspect, because the consent is a key requirement of PSD2 as a regulation. So let me show you the workflow, and let's see if that answers your question. Okay, so again, this is a mock-up that we did of the solution for exactly this type of workshops. Again, to this, let's say, demo version of the solution, we can even give you access so you can use it, explore it, ask additional questions, and so on and so forth. This part can be easily made available if you find it interesting. So this is the way that our platform look like. And if we talk about the real-time error, so identifying, looking at the transaction strictly from a fraud angle, we plot, or we take the data with regards to payments, and we plot them on this graph you see in terms of the probability of it being an error, and obviously the amount. So obviously everything that is on the top right corner is of important value and important probability. So if you, the way that it works, we upload the data. Now I'm demonstrating here the manual process, but it's usually, we don't have it manually. We try to integrate directly with the customer's accounting or ERP system. And in order to perform the controls, or the fraud controls, these are the, let me scroll a bit. these are the data points that we need for every single transactions. There are some others, but these are the main ones that we need. And out of these data points, we derive the normality or abnormality, in this case, of a transaction. So after the data is uploaded and we check that these data points are available in the data, usually the result of the analysis is displayed here in the dashboard, and what the person investigating actually does, he or she will see the presentation, the errors right here, and we display the suspicious transactions one under another. And because we worked in operations quite a long time, we said, okay, we cannot just say that the transaction is suspicious. We need to say also why and what the person that checks can do about it, or what is the next steps to be taken. So in this case, we found this transaction to be suspicious, and we also say that the supplier is very similar with another recurrent supplier, and we check to verify whether this transaction is compliant by investigating the origin of the supplier, the expense, and who is the approver. And in this case, you see that the name Carl and Curl are very, very similar. Like in the first study case that I've exemplified. And obviously, upon pointing out this type of transaction, then there is a subsequent analysis that is being performed, and this transaction is either flagged as an error or not an error, which then feeds back into the scoring, and obviously then it will score either higher or lower on the probability. These are also, we display here other type of errors for anybody that wants to check also other types of errors, duplicate payments, overpayments, currency errors. So we have a one-stop shop for the operational controls. And last but not least, this is an overview of the analysis that shows, okay, how many errors we found in which category. Basically, it gives an overview of the work being performed. So I want to stop right here a bit and see if there are any questions before I move on to the second part. So again, from your experience, why should companies look at this type of errors and controls? I believe this risk exists, but we are not having enough operational control. So I'll tell you why we started this. Again, we were finance managers. We've used to manage finance operations. We used to manage payments operation. We think, and we experienced only one type of the fraud scenarios that we've seen. We believe that, again, as I said at the beginning, fraud controls are really hard to define and hard to design, especially the ones in real time. And this is why big companies, their payments processes will more than likely remain complex. Obviously, everybody strives for standardization, but this standardization will take time, will take change management, will take money, will take resources. And the question is, what can you do today? Not what can you do when your processes are perfectly aligned, perfectly standardized, perfectly automated. So this is why we wanted to come with a solution that is very easily deployable, covers the largest majority of the risk, and allows you to do it in real time. So this is the reason why I think it should, because most of the companies that we've worked with and for, they are exposed. We haven't seen a customer that will, none of the three scenarios as example cannot happen, and we believe that our solution can help cover this risk in a manner that does not require too many resources. So there's a good, let's say, investment to outcome ratio. I hope I answered your answer your question. And one last thing I want to say here before I show the second flow. If you look at AI deployment, there are very few cases where it's deployed at scale. I mean, I've not seen many, and neither from the customer that we work with have I seen many. So it's not just a personal anecdote. And I believe and I see that operational controls, and especially in the payments, not just in payments, is a perfect ground to deploy AI models because they work significantly better than all the the macros, all the SQLs, all the things that usually are developed in-house for each control individually. And this is something that we validated quite across industries customers. Okay, all right. Let me show you the second flow. Okay, so let's assume that you want to check the identity of a supplier because there is a requesting change in bank details or a new setup of the customer. So this is the way our platform looks. I've put in here the details of Paid Analytics. So let's assume Paid Analytics works with some of you and you want to check that the account really belongs to us. So what we need is the VAT registration number. What we do a bit of data enrichment. So we try to automate also part of the vendor master data process. We take data from public sources and enrich it. So we give you also data that you can directly upload into the system and automate the vendor master data. But in order to check the account, we need a VAT registration number. We need a bank account. We run some consistency checks on the bank account. As many of you know, the IBAN has an algorithm behind it that you can check. And there is the email address of the supplier. So this is the input that we require from the customers that want to check the identity. And what this can be done, I've exemplified here one transaction, but obviously you can check more than one change to bank details at the same time. So the customer goes to ask for a validation of the bank details, and then this is the only thing that the customer does. What happens on the supplier side? So the supplier receives, because again, PSD2 regulation requires the consent from the supplier. The supplier receives an email. We usually brand the email with the name of the customer in order for the supplier not to be scared that there is a third party asking for this information. And the actual consent, what does it mean? Is we're telling him what data do we need and for how long do we need it. So in this case, we just the name and the bank account, and we keep it for 24 hours. We do not store data. So what the supplier will do, he will press the link. The bank is automatically recognized from the IBAN. He goes on, proceed. We're telling him that this is the data that we're asking from, which is the company name and the bank account. And the consent actually means he's redirected to his online banking where he logs in. But again, the login, to the PSD2 regulations coming back, the login details need to be kept by the bank, so they are not shared with anybody else. But the consent means that the supplier will log into his online banking, will put in his password, will select the bank account for which he can give us the okay to retract the data and validate. And this is it. And this is what the supplier will do. And what we will do after that, we will pull the data from the bank regarding his name, his bank account, and we'll do sort of a three-way match. We will match these details against what the customer has told us, what the bank has told us, and also what publicly available data there is. And if this three-way match is okay, we validate the identity to the customer, and we tell him, yes, this change is okay. And we also pull some other data if there is any know your client sorry, know your customer process, that you want to know what is the turnover, what are the shareholders, and so on and so forth. We pull other data from public sources. So this is the way that we validate the identity of the suppliers. This is it. From the, let's say, the second dimension on validating the supplier identity. And Anurag, thank you for your comments. We gave an example. It was the real time. It's how we identify one example of suspicious transactions. Yes, email controls and uploading of public records of KYC check and validation are both good features. This control is also GDPR compliant. It is. And obviously we've done everything to comply with the PSD2 regulation. The point being is that, again, I want to come back to the 2 dimensions. Check a transactions in real time, how normal it is from strictly from a fraud angle, and then validate the supplier or the partner's identity is the secondary key, is a secondary key element. So this was it. I would love to have any other questions or observations about things that you've seen, things you enjoyed, you haven't not enjoyed. So please, if there are any additional questions, please let me know. If not, you will get the presentation. I think it's sometimes in the next week. You will also get my contact details. And if you want to continue the conversation, you want to see our solution, you need help in establishing your own controls, or you just want to run a diagnostic, please, we are here. And thank you for the time that you have invested in today's session. And unless there are other questions, we're going to give everybody 5 minutes back to go to lunch, either probably working from home, but so it's not a, let's say, but yeah, this was it. So thank you everybody for your participation, and looking forward to discussions that may come up. So thank you everybody, all the best, and have a good day.